welcome to Amazing Jessy Show. This week we're doing the first episode of Make or Break a Child. Exciting, I know. So let's get into it. So the first episode of Make or Break a Child will be Make or Break a Child Culture. I heard a quote that says you cannot think of society without the person, and you cannot think of the person without society. And I sometimes think this is true of culture. When we begin to see the relationship and study the relationship between culture and a person or a child, we begin to see how our culture influences the child, and sometimes how the child can influence how others see the culture. Our culture shapes the way we live our lives. It can make a difference as to how we see ourselves and how we see others. Our culture is the place that we adopt or inherit our values, our views, our knowledge about other people, or how the world works for us. And that's how our culture definitely influences our choices. The way that our culture can influence our choices is by giving us a definition of what is considered normal or acceptable or the norm. So then when you go do something, most likely your actions are based off what is considered normal for your culture. And when you're more wary or hesitant to do something, it's most likely because that is something that is not seen as acceptable in your culture. So as you can see, our culture, which I keep saying too much, is like it's a subconscious thing in our mind, and our actions are based off of it without us even thinking about it. So the question for this week is, how can culture make a child? And when I say make, I mean make for the better. How does it make them a person? How does it make them a better person? And that's why we have the break part of this show. So this week we're looking at how can culture make a child, and next week we're looking at how can culture break a child. So how can culture really make a child? The first thing I thought of when I was thinking about this is it gives us an identity and a sense of who we are. And sometimes that can influence your actual traits, like being respectful or polite, and how much of that we really use in our daily lives. And growing up, like in school and abroad, and I was born here, I don't know what I'm saying, but I was raised in an African home. So when you go to school and you see loads of different cultures, it really makes you realize how different your culture can make you from like other people. Like I remember, and sometimes as a child, it's kind of hard to learn to embrace that and to show that. I remember in early, like maybe first year, maybe sixth class, something like that. No, first year. And I was in home ec class. And in home ec class, sometimes we would make lunch menus. And so then my teacher would ask us, what did you guys eat for lunch? And some people would say sandwiches. And in my head, I'd be like, oh, you do you. And she'd come to me and I'd be like, oh, I had jollof rice. And they'd be like, oh, what's that? So in my head, I'm like, do I just explain this? Or I actually have to explain this? Or do I take the easy way out? And the easy way out would be, well, it's like orange rice. And they'd be like, oh my god, that's so cool. And then we move on with life. But then as like second, third year, and fourth year came up, I'd want to embrace it. I'd be like, oh, it's a traditional African dish. And they'd be like, oh, that's so cool, that's amazing. And you just learn to kind of embrace your culture. Another way that I can see that sometimes our culture makes us different is that I'd say, oh, my auntie or my uncle made this. And they'd be like, oh, that's your uncle? That's your auntie? I'd be like, yes, but no. We call everyone our auntie and uncle out of like respect, and it's just a thing we do, and we never really call any aunties or uncles by their first name because that's seen as rude in my culture. And that's just some ways I've seen that our culture can really like make who we are, make a change, like the things we do or the things we would say, and it just makes us in a person. And I think that when you get a tiny bit older, you learn to embrace that and accept it. Just love how it makes you kind of different. The second thing that I was thinking about, this might be the last thing, this might not be the last thing, we'll see if there's gonna be a part 2 of this episode, but it's how our culture can influence our values, what we see as right or wrong, how we value things, how we relate with people, how we value money, how we value time, how we value like hygiene, what we see as common sense. And as I said, like in school, there's a lot of different cultures, and in friend groups, there can be a lot of different cultures. And sometimes there can be a clash of cultures. So somebody would want to do something, but you in your head would say that's just not me, that's not how I was raised, that's not something I could do, because our values will always influence what we do because that's just what we see as right or wrong. But the thing about values is that it's not it's not black and white. It's not that this is right or this is wrong, but it's just not my values. It's not how I was raised. And for this episode, talk about how that can be a good thing, because a lot of the time when you subconsciously don't do something because it's your values first, because it's your culture, it can save you half the time. It can stop you from doing something dangerous, something harmful, because it is that's not your culture. I've heard that phrase so many times. Like sometimes I ask my mom, why can't I say this, or why can't I do this? Like, why? And she'd be like, because that's not our culture. That's not how you were raised. And that can help. That can make you as a person. Last small thing I wanted to add, because I just thought of it, that our culture can give us a sense of community. You know sometimes how nice it is to see people who were raised the same way as you, who understand the things the way you understand them, who do things that you do as well. Just see like-minded people around you. That can be healthy, to find people who are like you. That's what our culture can do. I think that's such a beautiful thing. That's the end of the first episode of Make or Break a Child, and this was part 1A, Make or Break a Child culture, and next week will be part 1B, Make or Break a Child culture, if that makes sense. And remember, it's all about Jesus. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you. See you next Saturday.